The Mafia is alive and well in America, but it is a shadow of its former self, and the glory days of the 1940s and 50s are long gone. And while the five families are still strong, the RICO Act of 1970 and other factors had led to the demise of smaller families throughout the entire United States. Here are five Mafia families that no longer exist. The Lanza family of San Francisco. California is the largest state in America by population, and San Francisco is its second largest city. And like most 20th century metropolitans, it had its own independent mafia family. The Lanza crime family carries the distinction of never having an American-born boss. The family was founded by Francesco Pareto, an Italian immigrant who came to the United States in 1905 with his wife and toddler son. Francesco would later become involved with New York's gangs and took on the alias name of Frank Lanza. San Francisco's citizens voted against Prohibition, and when the law took effect, many chose to ignore it. This period during the 1920s turned the Italian-American gangs into organized families that we now know as the National Crime Syndicate. At this time, many Italians from the East Coast came to the West Coast to set up operations and make small fortunes by providing a product that was highly in demand. At some point in the 1920s, Lanza moved his family to San Francisco, and they settled in the Little Italy section of North Beach. It's unclear of what exactly Lanza's activities or associations were before he arrived in California, but in his early San Francisco days, he was not at the top of the underworld. That distinction belonged to Jerry Ferry, one of the city's largest bootleggers. On April 28, 1928, Ferry was murdered in his apartment. His body was found riddled with bullets in the bathroom. The man behind his assassination was believed to be Alfredo Scariso, who was another major bootlegger. Scariso would not live to see 1929 though. On December 19th, his body was found dumped in the Fair Oaks section of town. The cause of death was multiple gunshot wounds. The power struggle had been described as a gang war, and it lasted for 4 years. The final murder of this period happened in 1932, when Luigi Malvisi, that year's king of the bootleggers, was gunned down by 3 men with machine guns as he sat in a parked car. From this point, Frank Lanza became the new boss of San Francisco, and the killing stopped. In 1933, Prohibition was repealed, and the Mafia's most lucrative racket ended. Most Italian gangsters returned to the East Coast, leaving Lanza with a small crime family that was between 20 and 25 made men. The Lanza family needed to find new ways to make up for the lost revenue, and they diversified into loan sharking, gun running, prostitution, gambling, and narcotics. Frank Lanza died on June 14, 1937, from aplastic anemia, a disease that could be treated with blood transfusions. This gives him the distinction of being the only boss from the gang war era who died because the blood stayed in his body. The family kept a real low profile in the 1940s, with Anthony Lima as the boss and Michael Abadi as his second in command. In 1953, Lima lost his power when he was sent to prison for grand theft, and his underboss took over. Former boss Frank Lanza's son, Jimmy the Hat, was promoted to the number 2 position. Jimmy the Hat Lanza was identified by police as being at the disastrous 1957 Appalachian Mafia Conference, though he was not arrested and seems to have escaped by running through the woods. In 1961, Boss Abadi was deported back to Italy because of his criminal activities, and Jimmy the Hat now occupied the position his father held 24 years earlier. He would be the last boss of the family. 2 years later, in 1963, Joe Valachi would become the first made Mafia member to become a state's witness. His testimony shocked both the nation and the underworld, and it made Jimmy the Hat Lanza paranoid. One of the rules that Cosa Nostra put in place following the Castellammare War was that the families needed to remain fixed in their sizes. The only way for positions to open for new members was for old ones to die. But in San Francisco, where there already was a low pool of candidates to refill the ranks since members needed to be fully Italian, Lanza was not finding many men that met his standards. When Vlacci joined the Mafia, it was because the Maranzano faction during the Castellammare War needed new street soldiers to replace dead ones. And there was little vetting that took place. Jimmy the Hat did not want to make the same mistakes and bring a potential turncoat into his ranks. And so old members were not replaced when they passed away, while current members began to age into senior citizens. In 1978, Sergio Maranghi, an Italian drug trafficker, settled into San Francisco, and he caught the attention of Jimmy the Hat as someone who was a really good earner. In 1980, he was inducted into the family, and in 1991, Jimmy the Hat's fears came true when Sergio was arrested in a cocaine bust and became an informant. After that, the details of the family's activities go silent. Jimmy the Hat Lanza died of natural causes on February 14, 2006, at the age of 103 without a successor. In 2022, Sergio Maranghi, who was no longer active in the Mafia because of his rat status, also died of natural causes, making him the last known member of his family to pass away. San Francisco was not the only place in California with a Mafia presence. San Jose had its own family until the 2000s, and the Detroit Partnership also had a crew in San Diego, which is now defunct. We aren't fully sure if the Italian-American Mafia is still operating in the US's second largest city, Los Angeles. They did have a thriving family that hosted Bugsy Siegel as he built Las Vegas under the leadership of Jack Dragna. After Dragna's death, they declined, and in the late 1970s, they suffered a major blow when boss Jimmy Fratiano became the first Mafia leader to become a state's witness. It is known that the remnants of that family tried to carry on. In the 1990s, there was estimated to be 20 official members, but 30 years later, their current status is unknown, as law enforcement in Southern California is now more preoccupied with the Mexican drug cartels. The Buffalino crime family. When we think of the Mafia in Pennsylvania, our minds immediately go to Philadelphia. But in the small town of Pittston, in the northeastern part of the state, there was once a crime family there with a very powerful boss named Russell Buffalino. His character in Martin Scorsese's 2019 film, The Irishman, was played by Joe Pesci, for which he was nominated for an Academy Award. With a current population of just 7,000, Pittston is the halfway point between the cities of Wilkes-Barre and Scranton. The family formed in the early 20th century, and in just a few decades, their fortunes grew. They were active in the numbers racket, loan sharking, gambling, and bootlegging. But unlike other families during Prohibition, alcohol was not their biggest moneymaker. Instead, it was labor racketeering, thanks to all the coal mining that once existed in the area. Corruption was one of their favorite tools, and in the 1930s, then boss Santo Volpe got himself a seat on Pennsylvania State Coal Commission, which gave him enormous influence on the companies operating within his turf. From here, members of the family gradually took over the companies and the unions. Volpe had ruled over his family since 1908, and in 1933, he decided to step down and retire. His successor was John Ciandra, who was also a partner in the Knox Coal Company. With an estimated 30 to 40 made men, they controlled a large portion of Pennsylvania, along with New York's Southern Tier region. Ciandra's rule had a 16-year run until he died of natural causes in 1949. He was then succeeded by his cousin-in-law, Russell Buffalino, for whom the family is named after. Born Rosario Alfredo Buffalino in 1903, the future boss might have been a Sicilian by birth, but he did not seem to come from a mafia-connected family. His father settled in Pittston and found work as a coal miner just before his birth, and when Buffalino was just 2 months old, his mother took him and the rest of the family across the ocean to join Dad. Sadly, his father was killed in a mining accident a few years later, and the family packed up and returned to Sicily. He returned to the United States in 1906 and then went back to Sicily in 1910 after his mother passed away. 4 years later, he crossed the ocean again, this time settling in Buffalo, New York. With both of his parents dead, he became a juvenile delinquent in his teenage years. and became familiar with the people who'd eventually lead the Buffalo crime family. He would have an especially close relationship with John Montana, who was consigliere to Stefano Magaddino and also tried to run for Congress in the 1930s. Buffalino also became close with Buffalo family captain Joe Barbara during the 1920s, and the two were involved in bootlegging together. In 1928, he married Carolyn Ciandra, who came from a family that was heavily involved with the mafia. It's not fully clear of when he exactly became an official made man, but following the end of the Castellammarese War, when the mafia's organized crime became more organized, he was part of the independent Pitson family. Buffalino was known as the Quiet Don, who tried to stay low-key and always keep his cool. His reputation and his relationships allowed him to have influence over the underworld as a mediator between different factions. But despite all of his influence, he was never given a seat on the commission. He is also said to have made deals and mediated disputes with criminal organizations that were not part of the mafia, such as biker gangs. As the 20th century progressed, coal mining as an industry in eastern Pennsylvania was declining, and Buffalino diversified the family's labor racketeering into the garment industry. He is said to have owned 7 garment factories and also infiltrated into New York City's businesses after the 5 families gave him permission. In 1957, following the murder of Albert Anastasia and the rise of Vito Genovese, there was a feeling in the underworld that the mafia was starting to become unstable. Buffalino called for a meeting of all the heads of all the families to be held at Buffalo Captain Joe Barbara's 50-acre estate in rural New York so the current state of affairs could be sorted out and agreed on. Unfortunately, for the approximately 100 men at this meeting, it was going to be broken up because of an intrepid state trooper named Edgar Croswell. The year before, Croswell had pulled over a car leaving Barbara's estate that was being driven by Carmine Galante. When he looked up Galante's information, he learned that the man was a hardened criminal, and he began to occasionally check on Barbara from time to time, as he suspected that the wealthy businessman also had underworld ties. In the days leading up to the meeting, Croswell learned that Barbara had purchased a large quantity of meat from a local butcher, and that the mafia captain's son had reserved a lot of rooms in local hotels. While none of this was illegal, it made Croswell suspicious, and on the day of the meeting, he took notes on the license plates of cars entering town to go to Barbara's estate. When it turned out that the majority of these vehicles were registered to known criminals, law enforcement descended on the meeting. Most attendees fled on foot, while others were arrested and booked. This event brought the American Mafia out of the shadows and into the public light. While Cosa Nostra would remain powerful for another 30 years, the Appalachian meeting caused damage that could never be reversed. Buffalino appeared to have emerged undamaged from this raid, but Joe Barbara would never be the same. Barbara had legitimate businesses, and one of those was a bottling plant, where the company Canadian Dry canceled their contract with him following his arrest and publicity. In 1959, he died of a heart attack because of all the stress he was facing. Russell Buffalino ruled over his family without any problems until the 1970s. An interesting story about him is that during the production of the film The Godfather, singer Al Martino had the role of Johnny Fontaine taken away from him and given to Vic Damone. Martino's real godfather was Buffalino, and he went to him for help. Buffalino used his connections to get several news articles printed that said Francis Ford Coppola had made a mistake with his casting because the producers promised the role to Martino. When Vic Damone learned that one of the most powerful mobsters in the country did not want him taking this role in the movie, he resigned from the project, and the role reverted back to Al Martino. In 1977, Buffalino was indicted on charges of extortion after Jack Napoli, who was in witness protection, testified that Buffalino threatened to kill him over $25,000 that he owed to a New York jeweler. The following year, Buffalino was convicted and served 3 years of a 4-year sentence. After his release, Buffalino learned that Napoli was in California, and he contracted Jimmy Fratiano to kill him as revenge. But Fratiano was working with the government, and informed the FBI of this request. For this, Buffalino was sentenced to another 10 years in prison. He was released in 1989 and passed away from natural causes in 1994. During the last years of his life, Buffalino was grooming his former driver, William Big Billy D'Eya, to be his successor. Big Billy joined the family in the late 1960s and rose through the ranks as older members either died or were arrested during the mafia crackdown of the 1980s. While he was very efficient at running the family's rackets, he was less successful in bringing in new members. By the 1990s, many Italian Americans had no interest in joining the mafia because they were now a solid part of the middle class. In the 2000s, the IRS implicated Big Billy as being involved with money laundering. On May 31, 2006, he was indicted on federal charges for laundering $600,000 from illegal drug proceeds. When he learned that a co-conspirator was going to testify against him, he arranged to have him killed. But the person he gave the contract to was also an informant, and then he faced additional charges for trying to kill a witness. In 2008, he pled guilty to money laundering, conspiracy, and witness tampering. In exchange for his plea, the government dropped the charge for trying to kill the witness. However, in the mafia world, he was done. Mobsters are not supposed to plead guilty, as that would be akin to admitting that the mafia exists. Big Billy also became a government witness and testified that Mount Airy Casino Resort owner, Louis de Naples, committed perjury when he lied to the Pennsylvania Gaming Control Board about his relationship with Russell Buffalino and himself. This got 2 years knocked off his sentence, and he was released in 2013. In 2020, after years of staying silent and laying low, he agreed to be interviewed by investigative journalist and author Matt Birkbeck about his life and time in the mafia. The book was released in 2023 under the title The Life We Choose. The Buffalino family is considered to have become obsolete following Big Billy's guilty plea in 2008. Whatever remained of it has been absorbed into other families. The Trafficante family. The Trafficante family takes its name from 1940s era boss Santos Trafficante Sr. He would later be succeeded by his son, who shared the same name. There's a scene in Donnie Brasco where the New York mobsters need to entertain Trafficante Jr. in order to gain his permission and support for a venture that the Bonanno family crew was trying to do in his territory of Florida. The family traces its origins to the 1920s, when they were the underdog Italian mafia upstarts in the city of Tampa Bay, whose underworld was ran by Charlie Wall. The American-born Charlie Wall ran a network of corrupt politicians and city officials with a multi-ethnic crew that included Americans, Italians, and Cubans. Wall was the undisputed king of the city and state, but part of his success stemmed from not having powerful rivals. By the end of the decade, that was going to change. Ignacio Antinori was a Sicilian immigrant who formed a rival crew after arriving in Florida. Like most mobsters, he was engaged in prohibition activities like smuggling alcohol, but he soon diversified into something that he could continue after Prohibition's repeal in 1933: heroin trafficking. Meanwhile, Santo Trafficante Sr., born in 1886, also had his own independent crew and bootlegging operation. Both bosses were beneath Charlie Wall's rule, and in the 1930s, they decided to merge their groups together so that they could be stronger against Wall's organization. Antinori became the boss, while Trafficante was named his number 2. Around 1933, a war that would last a decade broke out between the two groups, which became known as the Era of Blood. Each side would ambush and pick off the individual members of their rival crews. The fighting climaxed on October 23, 1940, when Antinori was shot and killed in a cafe while he was with a female companion. The common story is that he was killed by 2 members of the Chicago outfit for revenge after stiffing them on a drug deal. It is known that Charlie Wall was out of town when the hit happened, supposedly laying low after a failed assassination attempt on his life. but there is the possibility that Wall organized the hit while staying out of harm's way. It's also possible that he might have been killed because of a conspiracy by his underboss, Santo Trafficante Sr., as the man ended up succeeding his murdered boss and benefited the most from his death. The fighting continued between the two groups until 1943, when Antinori's sons were arrested and sent to prison for drug trafficking. With the Antinoris no longer part of Tampa Bay's underworld, Santo Trafficante Sr. came to a peace agreement with Charlie Wall. The fighting would stop and Wall would be allowed to live and operate, so long as he recognized that he was no longer the dominant power and did not cause any trouble. This arrangement worked for everyone. Trafficante Sr. then began to groom Trafficante Jr. to take over the family as the next boss. They tried to expand the family into Cuba, but they were never able to make the island exclusively their territory. However, they did make a lot of money from the casinos in Havana that they controlled. The father was not able to stay in the shadows forever, and during the end of the 1940s, he found himself under constant police surveillance. During the 1950 Kefauver hearings, the father and son fled to Cuba to avoid being subpoenaed, while hoping to grow their business there. While gone, they left Salvatore Red Italiano in charge, but he had his own legal problems that caused him to flee to Mexico and put Jimmy Lumia in temporary command. Charlie Wall received the subpoena. He attended the hearings and spoke to the committee, which enraged Santo Jr. After the hearings were complete, the Trafficantes returned to Tampa Bay and found out that Lumia was making disparaging comments behind their back. Seeing him as an ambitious potential challenger, Sr. had the man murdered in order to consolidate power. In the following years, the father's health began to decline. In 1953, Trafficante Jr. was shot, but survived the attempted hit. It is speculated that the person behind this move might have been Charlie Wall, who had been hoping to regain his former power and prestige. The next year, Trafficante Sr. passed away from natural causes, and his son succeeded him. In 1955, Charlie Wall was found dead in his home. His throat was cut and his head was bashed in by a blackjack. Bird seed was thrown on his body, and next to it was Senator Kefauver's book, Crime in America, which included excerpts from Wall's testimony. From this point forward, the Trafficante's grip on power was secured. Trafficante tried to expand his operations in Cuba, and he was in attendance at the Appalachian meeting where he was one of the 60 participants to be arrested. The topic of Cuba was never discussed, and in the aftermath, he was investigated by Cuban police. He was arrested several times in the 1950s, but the charges were always dropped, except for one time when it went to trial and came back with a not guilty verdict. The Cuban Revolution was a blow to his empire, but it did get him to ally with an unlikely partner, the CIA. Both the Central Intelligence Agency and the Mafia saw Castro as a threat, and the mob was tasked with assassinating him, although neither group became successful in their mission. In the 1970s, Trafficante became implicated in the Kennedy assassination, which he denied at the time. These accusations would continue long after he passed away in 1987, with his lawyer claiming that he made a deathbed confession. In 1986, he was summoned to court for the last time and questioned about his involvement with the King's Court Bottle Club, the Bonanno family operation that Donnie Brasco was part of. He once again escaped conviction. On March 17, 1987, the Tampa Bay family boss died while undergoing heart surgery in Houston. He was 72 and never spent a day in prison. The family that he left at the end of his rule was not as strong or powerful as the one he inherited. After his death, the commission declared Florida to be open territory, while Vincent Lo Scalzo was proclaimed the new boss. And while Scalzozo might have been the new top guy, he no longer enjoyed the exclusive use of his domain. Lo Scalzo was faced with the challenge of replacing old members in the family in the 1980s and 90s. As a result, the family shrank in size. It's hard to find exact accurate numbers on their membership, as it appears that none of their members ever became informants, but there was a mass arrest of 18 men in the year 2000, whom the FBI described as member of the Trafficante family's Miami faction. In 1997, Los Galzo pleaded no contest to grand theft and received 3 months probation. A no contest plea means the defendant does not admit guilt, but they do admit that the evidence against them is too strong to refute. Vincent Los Galzo is still alive at the time of this video's release, and in his 80s. It is not clear if he's still involved with criminal activities or if he retired. It's also not clear if the Trafficante family still exists, with many believing that whatever membership remains has been absorbed by the 5 families as part of their Florida cruise. The New Orleans crime family. With origins dating back to the 1870s and maybe earlier, the New Orleans crime family carried the distinction of being the oldest mafia organization in the United States. The family was almost wiped out during the Sicilian lynchings of 1891, which we covered in an earlier video. After that event, then boss Charles Matranga ran his organization to keep an extremely low profile as they tried to rebuild themselves amid a climate that was hostile to Italians. Matranga ruled over his family until just shortly after the start of Prohibition, when he stepped down and installed Silver Dollar Sam Carollo to be his successor. Carollo was born in Sicily in 1896, and in 1904, his family crossed the ocean to settle in New Orleans. By 1918, he was a high-ranking member of the Matranga family. When Matranga retired, the bootlegging operation he built was small, so Carollo spent most of the 1920s waging war on rival operations so that he could become the biggest in the area. By 1930, he achieved that goal with the murder of rival William Bailey. After the end of Prohibition in 1933, he realigned his family's interest into drug trafficking and gambling. In 1930, during a drug buy, Carollo was accused of shooting undercover federal narcotics agent Cecil Moore. Despite multiple police officers willing to testify that he was really in New York at the time of the shooting, he was convicted and spent 2 years in prison. Following his release in 1934, Silver Dollar Sam struck a deal with Frank Costello and prominent state politician Huey Long to bring slot machines into New Orleans. He placed then-captain Carlos Marcello to run the family's gambling operations, and this illegal business went on for decades without any run-ins with the law. In 1938, he was arrested on a narcotics charge and sentenced to 2 years in prison. Upon his release in 1940, the government tried to have him deported. When the United States entered World War II, those proceedings were put on hold, and Carollo continued to run his family. He almost became a U.S. citizen when Louisiana Democrat Congressman James Morrison tried to get a bill passed that would have made him one. But those efforts were picked up by the press and exposed. Once the public became aware, the bill was dropped, and in 1947, Silver Dollar Sam was on his way back to Italy. Carlos Marcello then took the reins of leadership, following an election among the family's captains. He arrived in the United States with his family when he was just 1 year old. He was a juvenile delinquent, and when he was 28, he was looking at a lengthy prison sentence for trying to sell 23 pounds of marijuana. But he only served 10 months thanks to a deal the mafia made with then-Governor Huey Long. The exact size and strength of the family is said to have varied over time, but during the 1950s, it's believed that Marcello and Meyer Lansky entered a business arrangement where Lansky would consult the family on their gambling operations, while Marcello would receive a cut from the skim of the Las Vegas casinos in exchange for providing manpower to Lansky in Florida on an as-needed basis. In 1950, Marcello was subpoenaed and appeared before the Kefauver Committee, where he pled the Fifth 152 times. He was then labeled one of the most dangerous criminals in America. In 1960, when the Kennedy administration came to power and younger brother Bobby was appointed Attorney General, the mafia and organized crime became a priority for the Justice Department, and Carlos Marcello was a prime target. Despite being in the United States since he was an infant, Carlos Marcello was still not a citizen by the time the 1960s arrived. It's rumored that he skipped the 1957 Appalachian meeting because of his questionable immigration status, which made him reluctant to leave Louisiana, where he enjoyed immense protection from the state government thanks to corrupt politicians. In 1961, On what he thought was just a routine visit to immigration authorities, he was taken into custody by the Justice Department and deported to Guatemala, the country that he falsely claimed to be his birthplace. After a 2-month adventure that nearly killed him, he returned to New Orleans, hired an immigration attorney, and successfully fought the government's efforts to kick him out again. In 1963, he was charged with trying to defraud the government by purchasing a false Guatemalan birth certificate. A jury acquitted him that November. The following year, he was put on trial again, this time for bribing a juror and trying to have a government witness killed. He was acquitted again after the witness refused to testify against the boss of New Orleans. In 1966, he faced a different type of trial when he was summoned to New York City in order to defend himself against charges brought up by the Mafia's commission, with Carlo Gambino serving as the judge and chairman. The commission ended up siding with Marcello, and once the business was concluded, the meeting was raided by the police and the participants were arrested for consorting with known criminals. Marcello was released on bail, and when he returned to the New Orleans airport, he found FBI agents and reporters waiting for him. He declared to the press that he was the boss here, and then he punched one of the FBI agents in the face to prove his point. That stunt got him arrested and convicted to a 2-year prison term. He was out in 6 months. In the aftermath of the disastrous 1957 Appalachian Conference, along with the accusations that Albert Anastasia and Frank Scalise were selling memberships into their family, the commission put a pause on new members being inducted into Cosa Nostra. Like other families, the membership of New Orleans aged out and died. But there were plenty of associates, and despite not being official members, many had integral roles in the organization, which practically made them made men. Carlos Marcello was a larger-than-life figure, and despite being in charge of a relatively small family that may have had only 20 official members, he had a lot of political connections that were a valuable currency to trade in negotiations and alliances with other families and criminal organizations. In the 1970s, he entered into a partnership with the Dixie Mafia, allowing them to operate in New Orleans in exchange for a cut of their profits and their assistance to perform hits when needed. In 1978, the House Select Committee on Assassinations said that they believed it was possible that Lee Harvey Oswald and Jack Ruby might have had connections to the New Orleans crime family, and thus Carlos Marcello was implicated in the murder of the former president. No charges were ever brought, however. The theory that the Mafia killed Kennedy goes like this. During the 1960 election, Kennedy's father, Joe, a prominent businessman, had connections to the Mafia dating back to Prohibition, and he used those connections to help his son get elected. The election that year was closer than most people remember, and the winner was decided by Illinois, specifically Chicago, where it's claimed that the Chicago outfit orchestrated voter fraud to secure the Democrats' victory. In exchange, they were promised that Cuba would be invaded and the communist government would be deposed. Plus, the federal investigations into organized crime would cease. But the new president must have been unaware of this arrangement, if it existed, and he appointed his younger brother Bobby to become the Attorney General and unleashed him to take on the mob. The Mafia felt betrayed and arranged for the president to be killed, so that a new administration would come in, back off their activities, and fire Bobby Kennedy. While these results did happen, this is just one of the many theories regarding the conspiracy surrounding the 1963 assassination. In the end, Marcello's greatest asset, his political connections, was what brought him down. Secret FBI recordings captured Marcello and 4 other men who once served in government, involved in a bribery conspiracy to get multi-million-dollar Louisiana state contracts awarded to them. In 1982, he was found guilty of conspiracy, racketeering, and mail and wire fraud, which resulted in a sentence of 7 years in a federal prison. With his health failing and isolation in prison preventing him from running his family's day-to-day operations, leadership passed to his younger brother Joe. But Joe was nowhere close to his older brother in terms of being capable for the role. He was accused of being disinterested, aloof, and more focused on his legitimate businesses instead. Dissatisfied associates reached out to the Gambino family to see if they would be interested in taking a foothold in New Orleans. In 1990, Joe resigned as boss and while Carlos was out of prison, he was in his 80s and his health prevented him from returning the power. The remaining family members elected Anthony Carollo, son of Silver Dollar Sam, to become the next boss. Anthony Carollo might have been the last one as well. His underboss was Frank Gagliano, and Gagliano owned a restaurant called Frank's Deli, where the members would regularly meet to discuss business. In 1993, the FBI bugged the restaurant and caught the members discussing illegal activities. In 1994, during Operation Hard Crust, the FBI arrested 16 members of the Marcello, Gambino, and Genovese families based on the recordings. Carollo and Gagliano were sentenced to 3 years in prison. During the second half of the 90s, the family seemed to fall apart, with members becoming more interested in their lucrative, legitimate businesses while wanting to avoid the risks of illegal activities. In 2003, U.S. Attorney Jim Letton described New Orleans as having open city status in Cosa Nostra. All known members from the 1990s are dead today, and America's oldest crime family is now defunct. The Dallas Crime Family. While the New Orleans and Trafficante families have possible connections to the Kennedy assassination, it feels right that the fifth defunct mafia family we are covering will be the Dallas crime family, of which Lee Harvey Oswald killer Jack Ruby is believed to have been an associate of. Of all the crime families that have been discussed, Dallas was probably the smallest and least powerful of the five, with no grand figureheads like Russell Buffalino or Carlos Marcello. And while it was not a crew that was within the New Orleans family, it may have been a vassal, as it was never able to fully conquer the city's underworld. Carlo Pirano is regarded to be the family's founding boss. He entered the United States around 1889 and first settled in Louisiana. Sometime before 1910, he relocated to Dallas. After that, he started the Mafia's outpost in Texas with his brother Joseph as his underboss. Joseph's legitimate business was owning a grocery store. It's suspected that gambling and protection rackets were the family's first business interests, in addition to their legitimate ones. When Prohibition came into effect, they expanded into bootlegging. One of the family's soldiers was future boss Joseph Savello. He first appeared on law enforcement's radar in 1926 when he was convicted of Prohibition violations and sentenced to 40 days in jail. On July 12th, the local police performed a series of raids on suspected bootleggers and arrested 22 men across the city. This included Savello and another bootlegger named Joe DiCarlo. 2 days later, the two men met up at the St. Paul drugstore, and Savello was carrying a loaded shotgun. We don't know why he had it with him, but it doesn't appear that its purpose was to ambush and kill DiCarlo. Instead, the two men stood next to each other and were talking when the gun went off and hit DiCarlo in the stomach. Savello did not run and stayed with the mortally wounded DiCarlo. When the police arrived, he told them that the shooting was an accident, and a dying DiCarlo also confirmed that with his last breath. Savello was arrested and charged with murder, but a grand jury dismissed the charges and decided not to indict him due to DiCarlo's last words. In 1930, Carlo Pirano died from natural causes, and his brother Joseph became the next boss. Details about the family's activities after the repeal of Prohibition during his reign are unclear, and law enforcement appear to be very unaware of any mafia presence in their city. This could be due to the Pirano family not being a dominant force. Organized crime did exist in Dallas, but the people the police were aware of were American-born citizens that were not Italian. Joseph Pirano was found dead in 1956, with a bullet in his right temple and a gun in his hand. The death was ruled a suicide, and it's suspected that he slipped into a deep depression after his wife's death 8 months earlier. His successor was Joseph Savello. Savello managed to keep a low profile during the 1930s and 40s. It's said that he developed a close relationship with New Orleans boss Carlos Marcello. While Marcello was not at the Appalachian meeting, Savello was, and may have possibly been his representative there. Savello was one of the 60 men to be arrested that day, and when Dallas police found out that one of the mobsters had an address in their city, they were shocked, as they believed they had a tight handle on organized crime and had successfully prevented the mafia from moving in. On January 13, 1960, Savello was indicted for conspiracy and perjury offenses stemming from the Appalachian Meeting. He and 20 other mob leaders would be found guilty and sentenced to 5 years in prison. This case was appealed and overturned 10 months later. The appeals court felt that the prosecutors had successfully proved there was a conspiracy at the meeting, but they did not prove if it was about illegal activities. Savello might have been a free man, but he would spend the rest of his life under constant law enforcement surveillance, both from the FBI and the Dallas police, who did not want their mob in their town. He died from natural causes in 1970. Theories of the mafia killing JFK placed Savello and his family as the boots on the ground who made sure the work was carried out. However, there has not been any definite proof linking them to the assassination. Following Savello's death, it's believed the organization was taken over by restaurateur Joseph Ianni. If he did become the new boss, then his reign was short because he died in 1973 from a heart attack. Joseph Campisi, another restaurateur whose family's restaurant empire still exists in Dallas, is suspected of being the new boss. Both Campisi and Ianni had run-ins with law enforcement in their past, but the FBI did investigate them as being possible mafia leaders and did not find any credible evidence. The FBI believes that the Dallas crime family became defunct sometime in the 1970s following Savello's death, while others date the end of the family as being 1990 when Joseph Campisi died. Either way, the family has been long gone and replaced by other local gangs, as the melting pot of America continues to be stirred.